Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Mondays with Michele video. This is the third video in the Working with Spreadsheets series. This week, I'll share some helpful formatting and layout tips. I'll also demonstrate how to create additional worksheets within a single Excel file. Let's get started. We talked about setting up your spreadsheet and how you can do some basic formatting as far as assigning bold to your headings. We talked about how to resize columns. One thing I do want to show you, if we click on the little triangle here to select the entire spreadsheet, and if I move my cursor so it's between the borders of the columns, it turns into that double-headed arrow, and just double click. What it does is resizes all of the columns I selected, and since I selected the whole worksheet, it resizes every column to fit the longest item in that column. So that can be a handy feature. And if I resize all of them the same just by dragging one of the columns, I could individually resize to the longest item again just by selecting that column and double clicking so that you see that it will resize the particular column. Let's say I add a comment column, and I'll add another one that says more comments and another one that says even more comments. So what you will notice whenever you click in a cell and start typing, I want to point out your cell information also shows up in this area at the top, the formula bar area. And that can be really handy because if you are typing a lot of information, sometimes it's easier to see it when you look up top. So if I click in this cell, you notice it lists it up top here. And the nice thing is I can edit the information either by typing in the cell itself. So if I wanted to change James Smith to Jones, you notice as I'm making the change, it's showing it up top here in the formula bar. I could also just go up to this formula bar, click, and make the change right in this spot. And you notice it's reflecting the change in the cell on the spreadsheet. And I would again either hit the Tab key or press Enter. So that's just something for you to be aware of. There's two places where you can edit the text, either in the cell itself, or you can go up to this formula bar. And the advantage sometimes of working in the formula bar, you can see it is a much wider space. So I'll give you an example of where that is helpful. I'm going to type a long comment. So this is a long comment that I am going to type in. Now you notice what I typed is far longer than what should fit in this cell. Here's the border for the cell, but it has continued to show what I type, kind of intruding into what looks like the next column. Watch what happens now if I say I want to type something in the more comments column. I tab over it looks like there's text in this column, but there really isn't. Notice up top here, there's nothing. This cell is blank. I am going to type in another long comment. You notice that this particular cell, it now looks like my words have been chopped off to match that border. They actually haven't been chopped off. If you look up top, my whole comment is there. It's just not being displayed because of the size of the cell. So now you notice the rest of this is sticking out into the next column. If I now type something into that even more comments column, this is an even longer phrase that I will type in. So the minute I decide to put something into this even more comments, it's going to have the effect of hiding the last little bit of the column beside it. And that's not really what we want. If I've got a long comment, I want to be able to read all of it, not just the first little bit. So there is a command that I use when I'm setting up all of my spreadsheets. So I would click the little triangle to select the whole spreadsheet, go to the home menu, this feature called wrap text. Watch what happens to these comment fields. It has wrapped the text to fit the width of the box, which means you now have multiple lines of text. The other thing I typically do is fix the alignment of the cells, because you notice the text is all set to be lined up at the bottom of the cell, and that's not usually what we want. So these three symbols up top here, we want the text to all be top aligned, so that when I'm looking along a row of text, I've got last name, first name, the event, the year, the age, the mother's name, the father's name, and now this is where my comment starts. So having everything aligned at the top makes it much easier to read. If you try to align them center visually, just think if this was a really, really long paragraph. If I kept typing, I will keep typing and typing and typing and typing and typing. Do you see how visually it's going to be much harder to read, because information could end up being up and down a lot? Because I could have another really long one. This is even longer, and if I try and copy and paste some text. So do you see what I mean? Everything is a little bit harder to read because your eyes have to keep jumping around. It's much simpler if you line everything up at the top so that you are always looking at that first line and then reading down further if you need to. So that's something I tend to do for all of my spreadsheets, is select the spreadsheet, make sure wrap text is turned on, and make sure that top align is turned on. The second row of alignment symbols is how you want your text lined up side to side. So I might leave it as left aligned, or I might center it within the column. And I find it depends on the type of information. If it's things like years, ages, I might decide to center it. If it's any kind of sentence-based information, I'm going to leave it left aligned. So it's the idea of having paragraphs. So one question that comes up a lot when you're working with Excel, especially if you're wanting to add comments, I find there's times when I don't really want just one solid block of text. What I really want is to separate it into paragraphs like you would in a Word document. But the problem is, in a Word document, to create a new paragraph, we press enter and then we start typing. In Excel, every time you press enter, it moves you down to a cell in the next row. But there is a way you can create a paragraph. So if I want to create a second paragraph after my period here on a PC, what you would do is hold your Alt key down and press enter. And you've started a new line. And if I did it again, now I've got a blank line in between. This is a new paragraph. I could create a third paragraph by pressing Alt and enter. So if I do Alt enter again, and now I've got, this is paragraph 3. So this gives me the ability to lay out my text in a manner that will make it much easier to read if I'm doing any kind of lengthy comment. So your formatting options are more limited with Excel. It is not a word processing program, but being able to create separate paragraphs is really helpful. So now that we've talked about a few different options for lining up and entering our data to be able to do multiple paragraphs, let's talk about how to put in some of those other standard elements and prepare your page for printing. So most of what we've been doing so far is on the home menu. If we go to the page layout tab, this is where you have this page setup section. You can shrink your text to kind of fit on a page by scaling it. You've got some options for the worksheet. So the question came up last week, how do you turn on these grid lines so they will actually print? Because right now, I've got my grid lines set so I can view them. I haven't got them set to print. If I turned off the grid line, so if I uncheck view, do you see that all I have is a white sheet of paper? So typically, the default would be have these grid lines show when you are working on your spreadsheet. If I wanted them to print, I would tick that. Same with the headings. Right now, I can view the headings. If I want the headings to print, I would turn them on. And this little arrow here under page setup, if I click that, it brings me up kind of your master page setup window. And there's a number of different functions. I can get to the sheet options through the Sheets tab. I can get at the header footer information. I can get at margins, which is this option here. And there's also this print preview button. So now that I've turned on grid lines under sheet options for print, if I click on print preview, you notice the grid lines are showing. If I was to turn them off and go back in and look at print preview, this is what it's going to look like. In other words, this is what I have selected. It's giving me that image of what my document will look like. And I don't really want these row numbers and column numbers. That is what this headings command is doing. So if I now go back and look at print preview, so when we think of headings, we're thinking column headings. When Excel uses the term headings, it's meaning the alphabetic labels at the top of the columns and the number labels on the left of your rows. So it's really handy to have them turned on when you're working with your spreadsheet, but you don't want them usually when you're printing your document. So let's take a look at what you will want to set. So I clicked on that little arrow to get my master page setup window. So one of the areas you'll want to look at is headers and footers. And I usually will click custom header, and I can either have my heading for the page start at the top left, or I could center it on the page, or I could have it something in the right. And I can put different pieces of information in all three of these boxes. So I would usually put the title, whoops, helps if my fingers are on the right keys. I would usually put the title at the top in the center section. And I can click on this letter A, and this is where I can set the font for my heading. So I could make it Arial, bold. So I've now got that heading set up, and I'm going to click OK. And I can do the same thing for a footer. So I like to put the page number in. And if I want my page number to be in the center of the bottom of the page, I would enter the information in this center section. I'm going to put it in the right section. And I probably don't want my font to be quite that big. I'll leave it at 10 point. And I'm going to put page, and this is going to automatically put the page number. And what I like doing is saying page one of, and then however many pages. Because if I've got a spreadsheet, typically I'm clumsy. I'll drop the stack of paper. It's really helpful if they're numbered. So I like to do page and then this first symbol, then I type the word of, and then I click the second symbol. And do you notice it's showing down below here? It's showing page 1 of 1. It's giving me that little preview of what it will look like. And if I click print preview, look at what I've got. I now have my image showing with the heading at the top and the page number, and it's keeping track of what page I'm on. So right now we're displaying page 1 and the total number of pages. So that's a handy feature. But I want to turn these grid lines on so that they will print. And I can do it in several ways. As I said, I could turn them on right here. And if we go back to print preview, there they are. They kind of look like dotted lines. So the other way of doing it is if you want, rather than these kind of dotted grid lines, let's say instead you want more of a solid line. The other option you can do if you want to set your own borders, we can go back to the home menu, select the whole worksheet, this thing that looks like a little square. I can say all borders. And if I now go back to the page layout and look at print preview, now it's got solid lines. It's drawn in the borders. And you can set the borders to be different colors. You could set them to be thicker or thinner. The other item that you'll want to be aware of, if we click on the Sheet tab, this tells you which rows and columns you want to repeat. So for instance, I want that first row to be repeated at the top of every page. I want row 1 to be repeated. And if I wanted this first column to be repeated, I could specify the column, and that can be handy if you've got a spreadsheet that is, say, 15 columns wide and you're having to break it across multiple pages. You might want to have the last name, first name columns repeated on every page so you can keep track of which person's data you're looking at. So I'm going to put R1 for row 1. That's my heading row. And I'm going to say print preview. And if I now go to page 2, it's got the headings on every page. So we've talked about the headings. We've talked about how to set up our borders, and you can do that, as I said, from the home page, this border option, or you can do more the dotted line approach and specify the grid lines to be printed. There is this item called print area. So if you don't specify anything, it's going to try and print everything on the worksheet. And this dotted line that you can see, it's showing you that's where it's going to split the information. So in other words, these first columns up to column F will fit on one page. Then we have column G, H, and I will fit on another page, and J and K will fit on another page. So it's going to take 3 pages just to print these 7 rows of information. Now, I might not want to print all of the spreadsheet. Let's say I only want to print these 5 columns. I can select the area that I want to print, click on this print area, set print area. And if I now take a look at what my printout will look like, it doesn't matter that I have all that other information on the screen. It's only showing me this area. So that's a handy feature. Now, last week, the last thing I want to show you, I talked about the fact that a worksheet is kind of like a chapter in a book. And as I've just shown you, depending on how you set the print area, one worksheet can mean multiple pages that get printed out. But what if you want to have another chapter in your book? In other words, wouldn't it be nice if you could have multiple worksheets with related information in the same file? And you can. This designation down at the bottom is the name of this particular worksheet. If I right-click, I can rename it to something more meaningful. So this will be Smith. We'll call it the Smith and worksheet. Now, maybe I want to create a new worksheet with information on the Jones family. Maybe they married into the Smith family. I can click this plus sign, or I could right-click and do Insert. And I can create a brand new sheet. And if I right-click the name and click Rename, I could call that one the Jones family. So I can create multiple worksheets, and these new worksheets do not have any of the formatting that I would have set up for my Smith family. So this is like a brand new document. You'd have to format it exactly the way you want. And the nice thing about this is I can go back and forth between worksheets by just clicking the tab at the bottom. And that can be really handy. And I'll just show you a worksheet that I created for my rentals. So I wanted to have a place where I could keep all of my renton information together if I found stray rentons when I was going through different films, when I would go down to Salt Lake City on research trips. So I created this tab. I labeled it Family Group. I've got one for marriages. I've got one for burials. So as you can see, if we look at the marriage ones, I just had a column that said the film number, so I could see where did I get this information. And I said what the description of the film was, and I've got some information. So I transcribed the year, the month, the day, the first name of the groom, the surname of the groom, occupation. So all of the key fields. So this gave me a way to record all the miscellaneous rentons, but keep them in one file. And I can create as many worksheets as I want to store the different pieces of information. So that can be really handy. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. Don't forget to download the handout. You'll find the link in the video description at the bottom of your screen. You may need to click Show More to see the handout links. Thanks for watching.